Hi folks, as you're joining us, we are optimizing the CZ-75B. This is a brand new one right out of the box. 10.5-pound double action side trigger pull. We're going to show you exactly how we peel this down to about a 6-pound trigger pull. Only with the spring optimization. Single action side, breaking out of the box around 4.5 to 5 pounds. We're going to show you how we peeled that down to below 3-pound single action trigger pull. Again, only with spring optimization. And also out of the box, we're extracting empty shell casings. That's an indication of how fast the slide is cycling. How fast the slide is cycling has a lot to do with how much felt recoil a person feels when they're shooting the handgun. 12 feet out of the box, we're going to peel that down by 50%. And that is going to result in a less recoil impulse, more controllable handgun for the shooter. That's what we're doing today, and we're ready to get started. Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, and this is what we're going to kind of think of as the master class, so to say, of the BHOptimized products for CZ-75B pistols, like what you see here on the board, and the CZ-75 Compact. We've got products for both of those, and this is going to really start kind of like from the top with the BHSpringSolutions optimizations and upgrades that are available at BHSpringSolutions.com, how they came to be a little bit so you can understand what might be the best of these products that are going to serve your needs. This is an incredibly utilitarian handgun, and it's used for everything from concealed carry to military law enforcement. It's one of the most popular handgun platforms in the world, certainly for competition use, and all of those uses have some different unique needs for the shooters in terms of their performance and how the handgun would perform if it's optimal serving in any of those roles. The platform is extremely flexible. We'll get into that as we go along. One of the most helpful things, if you followed along with us in the past on some of our instructional videos for the high power pistol and for the 1911 pistol, it really is kind of helpful to kind of purge that information while you're watching this and really try to accept the CZ-75 as a completely different handgun, a completely different operating system. What makes it go tick-tock is very different from the high power or from the 1911 certainly, and we're going to get into all that. I will admit one thing about the CZ-75 that gives me personally an affinity for this handgun is I always seem to shoot these handguns extremely accurately from a marksmanship perspective. Now, I have never done a lot of practice with double action, single action scenarios out of a holster. When I do carry a CZ-75, I typically carry it cocked and locked, and the nature of the single action side of a double action single action trigger is foreign to my reflexes because of so much of the high power 1911 usage and practice, and it's something that I could get used to, and I'm sure I could, especially in a cocked and locked scenario. I've always shot the handgun well from a marksmanship perspective. In other words, intentional aiming, firing, one at a time. It's possible that I've consistently shot these handguns just grabbing one, picking it up cold, and taking a shot better than maybe any handgun that I've ever had in my hand. So it's hard not to like these. Before we get into the spring kits, I want to show you something else that's kind of easy for me to like. We're going to first check and confirm that we are clear and we don't have any ammunition hanging around within arm's reach right now. We are a full-line Metgar magazine distributor, and this is a brand new CZ-75, by the way. We haven't even but just barely unwrapped this thing, and we put some BH Masters grips on it here for the show. And 16-round flush fit magazines came with this CZ-75. Being a full-line Metgar magazine dealer, that is a 17. Only adds you that much butt plate for an extra round capacity. And then I can also go to the extended 19. That gives me 19 plus 1. That's a 20 round capacity of 9mm on board, and that's pretty efficient considering the space that's being used. Very difficult not to like that. You guys in the restricted states, we have 10-round capacity magazines as well. Also, our line of grips, we're going to go ahead and talk about those real quick. We have 2 different grip profiles for the CZ-75. See how we can get these nicely in the picture here. Maybe put those right there. We actually have, these are 2 completely different grip profiles. These have obviously a thumb contour. This is one excellent grip hold with the CZ-75. The ones that you see here and the ones that you see on the handgun, we call these a low profile CZ grip. They are a more, I don't know how you'd say it, a more subtle grip, but this center point of swell right here, really nice ergonomic for the hand. I like how that ledge right there is a great positioning personally for my thumb. That we get, there we go. It just works. These are super upgrades that have been thought out, not just because they're a fantastic high quality walnut wood product, but also coming, there's a smooth or a non-checkered version, has nice beautiful wood grain, and this is something that we wanted. We have an affinity for getting our hands on wood and steel guns, we call them, and these are not only just beautiful and high quality wood, but we really put the time into thinking about the ergonomics and how what the hand likes to wrap around on grips. One more thing we can talk about real quick before we get into the spring kits. We also have CZ-75 pin punch tools kit that we developed. This is every pin punch tool that you need when you go and do a complete spring change out on a CZ-75B. Okay, spring kits real quick. We have for full size and we have for the compacts. We have 3 different grades of spring kits, and I'm going to kind of introduce those to you right now. You're going to see on our packaging, we have a basic optimization spring kit, a range and target optimization spring kit, and a high performance optimization spring kit. I'm going to simplify this real quick by a process of elimination. If you are a competition guy, and you reload your own ammunition and you play with those recipes a little bit, this high performance box, that's the one that you're going to want to take advantage of, because it's going to give you all of the most flexibility as far as slide velocity synchronization with springs. If you are not a competition shooter or you're not a reloader, probably the basic or the range and target is going to be ones that meet your needs. If you are really looking to improve trigger integrity, range and target, you'll be better served by that one than the basic. If you're fine with your CZ-75 the way the trigger is, you may want to just possibly marginally increase the integrity of the trigger, say, or the crispness of the trigger. You're going to get away with the basic optimizing spring kit, and especially if you're not getting into that much say plus P ammunition using, you can also get everything you need from the basic spring kit. So that's really a good quick overview of what these 3 grades are all about. We have them again in full size, we have them in compact. If you have fresh springs, and you know you have fresh springs, especially BHSprings, in your CZ-75, and you happen to want to, you only want to improve the integrity or the quality of the trigger pull, we have only the trigger pull reduction optimization kit springs as a kit, and this is quite popular. Real quickly, what this does: lightens the mainspring, increases the recoil spring, and lightens the firing pin spring, the trigger return spring, and the firing pin plunger spring. And the reason is because all of these get involved when you start optimizing springs in one place, you need to come back and balance those springs. So that's what these springs are made to do. Now, we're going to caution right now at this point, when you purchase a spring kit from BHSpringSolutions, you are going to be optimal if you install the entire kit or replace all of the springs in the gun. With this trigger pull reduction system, what we have done here is we have put together a combination of springs that we know works well at reducing both the double action side and the single action side of the trigger. And when we install or reinstall springs, we're going to be going ahead and installing that setup specifically, and we'll show you the difference in the trigger, the double action side, and the single action side as well. So that is a overview of our spring kit products. We also have recoil springs available individually at BHSpringSolutions.com, and right now at this point we are going to do two things. We're going to do a trigger pull break weight scale test, and then we are going to do 5 shots out on the range, and we're going to be looking at how far are our ejected empty shell casings flying when we shoot standard pressure ammunition. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the double action side first. All right, we are 10 pounds, 6 ounces. This is very, very consistent with what we were seeing on the double action side here before we started the video camera. We're going to go ahead and do that again. Marcus, let's go ahead with the double action side before we get to the single action. 10 pounds, almost 14 ounces. So 10 pounds, 6 ounces to 10 pounds, 13.9 ounces. So that's about where our double action side has been. Obviously those can be and usually are quite heavy. Now we're going to go to the single action side, and we are 4 pounds, 8.5 ounces. So right about 4.5. That's also consistent with what we were seeing. And just a tick over 4 pounds. Go one more time here. And 4 pounds, 9.8 ounces. So approximately 4 to 4.5 pounds. I think we would say 4.5 to maybe just a tick over that is about where we're at on the single action side. So now we'll be going out to the range and doing test and see how far our ejected empty shell casings are going with the OEM spring setup. Okay, we're out here on the range and we got 5 loaded. We're going to be shooting into the target. When I hold the firearm right above this corner, the distance from that point is marked on our concrete. So we're going to be watching where these extracting empty shell casings are landing. This is Remington 115 grain. It's a kind of a real middle-of-the-road standard pressure ammunition for target use that we've been using lately for a lot of testing. So we will get started. About 10 feet. Is that right? That went past 10 feet, didn't it? Yeah. Okay, and we were not very consistent. We only got 5 or 6 feet, but everything else was tossing 10 feet-ish or so. Okay, we're going to note that, and we'll see at the end when we have resprung this pistol how we're liking the slide velocity then. The punchline on this is anything in single digits generally is considered acceptable. If you start getting into double digits, meaning 10, 11, 12 feet, we're really getting hyper slide velocity. We're dealing with more recoil than we need to be. The slide is cycling faster than it needs to get the empty shell casings clear of the firearm, obviously. So The sweet spot for me with most pistols is if I can be extracting the empty shell casings in, say, the 6 to 7 feet range. That is what I would call the real sweet spot. If I'm extracting in the, say, 5 to 8 or 4 to 8 range, that's also fine. What I've always noticed out of CZ-75s is out of the box, they're all the way out, as far as the slide velocity is all the way out, kind of what I would call on the edge, so to say. So this was nothing of any big surprise. Also not a knock on CZ. You can take one of these out of the box and go shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. I would spring it a little differently, and I'd have a much more comfortable thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds. So, okay, we're going to go back into the bench and get started on disassembling the CZ-75. All right, we're going to take a quick preview here of what's about to happen to the CZ-75. I have chosen to use the High Performance Optimizing Spring Kit from our BHSpringSolutions CZ-75 Optimizing Springs. Reason I am is because this is going to give me the choice of springs to do the full optimization that I'm looking to do on this particular handgun. Specifically, it's going to give me all of the trigger optimizing springs that are also included in our trigger pull reduction kit, and we're going to make a lot of springs, a lot fewer springs here quickly. You notice a lot of recoil springs in here. I've laid these aside. We're not going to be using those. There are actually 8 recoil springs in the high performance kit, and they range from a 9.5 pound punch line here on this. This is for guys who have a really good light reload. They're reloading their own ammunition at home, and they're really downloading these things. And at a 9.5 pound recoil spring, your CZ-75, if it is clean, if it is well oiled, you will fully cycle those handguns quite well. So we have chosen the 17 pound recoil spring. When we were doing our testing, we were testing with the OEM spring, which is about a 14 pound recoil spring, and we will be replacing that, at least initially, for our first testing when we were finished, with a 17 pound. So we're going to go ahead, set those aside. Also, we're setting aside the package that includes our standard firing pin spring, trigger return spring, and firing pin plunger spring. We're going to be replacing those with our light firing pin spring, light trigger return spring, and light firing pin plunger spring. And you might look at this and say, well, light firing pin spring. Now, why would we be having that on a trigger pull reduction kit? And the reason that we're going to have that is because we're also going to be lightening the mainspring, and that is the spring that energizes your hammer to hit the firing pin. The firing pin spring is the one that opposes that hammer. We'll be downgrading or lightening the 20 pound mainspring down to a 15. That's going to be less force hitting the firing pin, and we want to have a lighter firing pin spring in there as a result. That's the reason. So you start to see that it's not okay just to replace one spring in one place to try to get an effect. In order to lighten the trigger in the CZ-75, it's a group of springs that all work together, and you can't leave one out or you start having yourself fails to fire and annoyances like that. So out of the main springs in the high performance kit, there are 6 of them. 20 is the OEM. We're going to be going ahead and installing the 15. That's part of the trigger pull reduction kit as well. So then we'll be able to lay the rest of those aside. We will also be installing new slide stop spring, and the model here we have, it looks like this. We will be installing a new firing pin lever spring, detent spring, sear spring, also extractor spring, magazine release spring, and trigger bar spring. We already mentioned the recoil spring and the mainspring. The CZ-75 is a spring heavy pistol, and we are going to be getting into that next. All right, we've taken our slide off. I'm going to go ahead and take our original recoil spring out. And yes, we do always keep all of our original springs, send those back from the custom shop as well with the and then we're going to go ahead and just put our 17 pound that we're going to replace with and with our barrel, and we'll go ahead and set those aside. We're going to go ahead and take care of our slide springs first. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get the extractor out. The extractor pin is located right there. What do you think we take the UPC off here, guys? All right, I've got a 1/16 standard pin punch, and that's a rather painless out. Now, as I pull the pin punch back out, I want to be holding this extractor because it's got a spring behind it. And so we'll come out like this, then our extractor, and the extractor spring. Yeah, there we go. The CZ-75 extractor spring, this is a brawnier spring than we see in the Browning high power design for the external extractor. And then there is the extractor piece. You can see what effort they went to in the design world to get an extractor claw that is like just incredible. See how large that thing is? I mean, they've even, see if I can get it good for the camera here. It's like they made the extractor claw the thickness of the part, and then they just like kept going. You see this right there? And there we go. Just an incredible size extractor claw if you've never seen that in a CZ-75. It definitely contributes to the high level of reliability that you experience most of the time in CZ-75 pistols. All right, the other pin that we'll be removing in the slide is going to be this firing pin stop pin, and we'll get to that next. Okay, the firing pin spring, firing pin stop pin, that is here. We have firing pin plunger right there. That's your muzzle drop safety mechanism in the CZ-75B. Firing pin here, and it's backed up by a firing pin spring. Your firing pin plunger is also backed up by a spring. Now this one, we're going to come left to right, and this one is not for the faint of heart or the faint of hammer. And 3/32 roll pin punch on this pin, and we're going to go ahead and grab the man size hammer. This one is one that takes some persuasion. Okay, and if you've never seen me work on a gun before, the side of the hammer is a tool, and I miss less with it, so I tend to like it. There we go. There's the firing pin stop pin. This is the pin that stops your firing pin in essence. And I'm going to make a point of note here. These have a reputation for becoming deformed. They have a reputation for becoming bent. They have a reputation for becoming in need of like a surgical removal from the slide. So this has been a bit of an annoyance, I guess is what we would say. We want to bear this in mind when we start lightening that firing pin spring. We want to bear in mind that we want to be lightening the main spring that smacks that firing pin and hits this pin is what in essence happens. So go ahead and get that now on out of our way. We're going to hold everything also in place because as you saw, that firing pin wanted to go ahead and just come on out. We'll need to depress the firing pin plunger. Here is the CZ-75 firing pin, and now easily out comes our firing pin plunger, also having a spring in there. And there we go, and we got the original firing pin spring. So we now have our slide completely detail stripped. All right, going to go ahead and we're going to set aside our springs here real quick. Going to get those out of a couple of the different bags here. And the first spring that we're going to have our extractor spring. That's going to replace the original CZ extractor spring. No tangible real differences between those except you get a fresh extractor spring. So we're going to now go ahead and set our magazine release and trigger bar spring back aside. In our light spring bag, we're going to go ahead with the light firing pin spring. I'm going to show you the difference between the standard and the light firing pin spring, and you can see them right there. The importance for this is because we're going to be putting a lighter spring behind this hammer, so it's going to get propelled forward with less force, and we're going to ask it to overcome a spring that requires less force to overcome. So that is kind of the spring that gives us the green light, so to say, to lighten that main spring. So we're going to go ahead and we'll set that aside, put our original firing pin spring on out of the way. And then we had this firing pin plunger spring. And you can see, and this takes trigger pressure in order to depress that spring. Got a little grease on it, and we're going to be replacing that with a lighter firing pin plunger spring that you can see there. And I believe that does it. We already set aside our 17-pound recoil spring, and we're about to get started on reassembling this slide. All right, we're going to reassemble the slide. All right, we've got our new light firing pin plunger spring and our firing pin plunger. Really nice fit in that part. We're going to go ahead and we're going to drop the firing pin plunger in just like that. And when we do that, we're going to orient this part, in other words, facing me as it's going in. Then we will just be pressing downward on that. Just like we just did it, and we should be in good shape. Now, we should also be able to now slave that firing pin just like that, and we know we have everything lined up. So, firing pin plunger, firing pin, the slots are oriented up because those are what are going to accept our firing pin stop pin. Okay, we're going to fix a mess up here real gently from Mark because I should have been coming from the other direction. We're going to go ahead and reinstall right to left. So we'll re-slave it back from this direction. And we're going to use a little bit of protection on this. There we go. Now what I have done is I'm holding everything in place with the pin punch here. Now I've got, this is just Gorilla Tape made into a couple of layers and a hole in the middle of it. And I've got my pin started. And I hope to be able to one-hand this until we've got it in far enough. And I think we probably do, yes. All right, I think we're in good shape there. Yeah, we're good shape on the install. We've got the function we want to have. Both of these parts, I should be able to depress here on the firing pin plunger and go home with the firing pin out the end of the breech, and that's exactly what we're doing there. So we are reassembled back in good shape. Now we are going to grab our extractor spring. The extractor spring is oriented at an angle, and it goes in just like you just saw right there. We'll go in with a drop of oil. Now we will need our 1/16 pin punch. And we're going to need to slave this one from the top down. So we're going to go ahead and reorient like this. There we go. What we've done is we've lined the hole up. Now we can see how I've situated everything here. Lined up our hole, and this pin has a flat end on it. That flat end is going to be oriented to go in last. Okay, now what I've done here is I basically slaved the extractor, lined up the hole with the 1/16 pin punch coming from the top, and then placed the pin just a couple light taps, just like that, and we already are behind the extractor. And now from this point we can finish that up. This is a really good place for our for the 3/32 nail set punch. Okay, very easy pin to install, and we'll come back and we're just going to make sure we're tapped in place, and that pin is now very much flush, and we're in good shape. We're going to give the barrel a clean here in a few minutes, but we have completely now resprung the slide. Okay, in the frame we're going to start with the fire control group. That involves removing the safety. You cannot remove this safety until you have released this spring. This is actually your sear spring, and we're going to go under it with a small, very flat bladed screwdriver, and we're going to get under it and lift that up. There we go, like that. Now I've got a screwdriver underneath it, and I can press out the safety just like you just saw. And by lifting that spring up, that is actually what does release that safety. So we'll go ahead and pull our safety on out. Now our fire control group is going to just simply raise up and out like that. We're going to handle this as a separate subject. So for now, we're going to go ahead and just set that aside. We'll change the springs in that in just a moment. The next step we're going to do is we're going to remove the mainspring that is in this area, and we will be doing that next. Okay, now we are going to get to the mainspring, and the way that's going to happen is, as you're seeing me right now, we went ahead and we take out that pin where we're at, and now we'll just do as you just saw. And next we have a pin right here. Now a lot of us high power guys would think that's a sear spring. That is not a sear spring in the case of the CZ-75. that's a 1/16 pin punch that we just helped that come out. Okay, we can take out our mainspring. Next step we're going to do is we're going to take out the safety detent, and I want to show that to you right here. There's the detent, there's the safety detent spring, probably an edit point right there. With the safety detent right here, and we have the safety detent spring right there. And one of the things I noticed was that the safety operation seemed quite mushy and sort of indecisive, and in order to release that, we're going to go right here with a small pin punch of 1/16. We're going to come rearward with it, and that is going to go ahead and just pop right out fairly easily. And I hope we're able to capture this on video and also have it in a place where I'm able to see what I'm doing. What that is going to do is just come, what you just saw, just rearward and out, like that. And we've got the two pieces, the spring and the detent piece. And one of the things I'm going to be kind of studying is this edge of this detent with the safety lever here in a few minutes. We're going to see if that holds any future for helping us. I'm also going to compare real quickly the safety detent spring that's going to be going in, and I think it's going to look fairly comparable, but what I remember here about this is we were getting a bit better decisive action with the BH spring, but I think for appearance purposes they look fairly similar. We might have just a little bit, maybe a quarter to a half a coil more on the BH spring. Not get those mixed up. So that's the spring that will be going back in on the detent. Now, we have another interesting little operation that has to be done. In order to get this hammer assembly out, we have to be able to release this pin. This pin can't go anywhere until that little pin right there that I just pulled up. And now if we have a set of tweezers, there we go. And we have our pin out, and that pin is basically a blocker for this pin that we're now going to attempt to go ahead and push on out, which is, as you're seeing right there. And now we release out our hammer assembly, and we are now empty in the rear of our grip frame. We're going to go ahead and, I believe that's a 3/32 roll pin punch. For the trigger pin, we want to go with a 5/64 pin punch for this trigger pin. 3/32, it's just too snug in there. It can be done, but it's just not the right pin. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and leave that slaved, if you will, with that pin punch, and we're going to look right down in here at this straight slot screw, and that straight slot screw is going to be what is holding in our magazine catch spring. And Hopefully we're seeing that on the video. When you look down in your CZ, that screw is kind of like a flathead screw that you'd hold a hinge on a door with or something. Almost. And that screw comes out. We will be able to actually I want a needle nose pliers. There we go. We're going to be able to reach down in, squeeze the sides of that spring, and we'll go ahead and release our magazine catch or magazine release spring. And then we have another one right down in here that should lift right out, our trigger bar spring. And at this point when we pull out, we're going to release our trigger return spring. Right there it went. So our trigger return spring is now out, and so is everything else. And we are now down to almost completely bare frame. One more spring. That's going to be our slide stop spring. We're going to go ahead and get that. And we're very close to being completely disassembled. We can now go ahead and remove our mag release. And we have one more pin that we do have to get removed. And it's right here. And this is a pin that is actually doing nothing but holding our slide release spring in place. There we go. And the way that comes out is we're going to pound it inward, and then it's just going to fall free. Just like that. There is that pin. Looks just like that. And now with that pin out, our slide stop spring can also come out, and we have a completely bare CZ-75 frame. We're ready to start reassembling. Before we can reassemble the frame, we're going to need to change out two springs in this little guy right here. And there's a lot of I think questions about what is this thing called. I've heard it called a sear block. I've heard it called the ejector, which it is. Right there is the ejector, and it does not disassemble. The ejector carriage, the firing pin lever block. So for our purposes, it's the ejector, sear, firing pin lever block carriage. Or firing pin lever carriage. So anyway, this is sort of like the control brain in a computer, but not. What we're going to do now that we've got this out, we're going to go ahead and press with a 3/32 punch from this side, and we're going to notice the firing pin lever removes. Sear spring. Okay, we're going to start putting back together our ejector, sear, firing pin lever contraption carriage. And the firing pin lever looks like that. It has a ledge right there, and that is where our firing pin lever spring is going to live, similar to just like that. Now we're going to hold that spring in place like that, flip over, inside our carriage right there is another ledge, and that's where that is going to live. And we're going to slip the whole thing with the spring captured there next to it right down in like so. And when we have that spring and the part lined up with the hole, like we just about do right there, we're going to come back from this side, take the pin, and pin everything in place. Hopefully, we'll line that spring right back up again. Just like that. Now, if we have done right, we'll have a little spring tension on that spring. Okay, now in our ejector sear firing pin lever carriage, our firing pin lever and our firing pin lever spring, they're captured. We're going to come from the bottom up with the sear coming in just like just in like that, and we should be able to pin that all the way on across like that. Now we're going to put the sear spring in. We are just a sear spring short from having this little contraption put back together, and the way that we're going to do this is we're just going to drop this sear spring in there just like that, and then we're going to repin it. Now we're going to come from the side that does not have our firing pin lever drop our sear spring into position like that. Just gonna get position or angle on that spring, and we should be able to pin it just like that. Actually, I think just a little encouragement right there helped that out. Okay, now we should have a little downward movement right there with some spring tension. We do. Should have some movement here with some spring tension back, and we do. And we're ready to install that back into our CZ. Now we're going to install the magazine release, and the magazine release gets installed by, we're going to install the magazine release device itself. And there's a, where this magazine spring lives, see this, how it's offset? It kind of looks like it's offset, and when you're installing it, it doesn't line up just exactly in the middle. You have to be kind of over to one side, and then you'll get the tines of the spring that look like that to slip down in there. So what I'm going to try to do, and we're going to see if we can actually show this on video, maybe. See if we can get situated here in such a way so that this will show. There we go. Okay, I'm going to drop the spring down in here where it goes, and if I can, I'm going to show you what I've done right there. Got one tine in there. We're going to come back up just a little like this, I think one tine is actually a little longer than the other, and it makes it a little bit more possible to do what I just did. Now I've got both of them kind of started in the slot there, and there we go. Good. Now, top of the spring is where it's at, and we're captured now, and that is not going to go anywhere. Now we're going to put the trigger bar spring in. These are kind of interesting how they install, because that trigger bar spring is going to go in and lay right down. By the way, these curved ends, those are going to be oriented facing down. And try to get the hands out of the way here. There we go. If we can see that in there, that's how that's going to go. Magnetic screwdriver would be very handy right about now, but a little balance there worked out too. This is going to be our mounting screw really for both of those springs. And that's it. And so we should be in good shape on those. One of the parts that has a reputation for breaking or fracturing in the CZ-75 is the trigger return spring. This is BHSpringSolutions Optimized Trigger Return Spring. We do put a lifetime guarantee on these, and if they ever have a problem, you're welcome to send them back to us for a replacement. And we can say that that's not something we've had to do too many times, thank goodness. A lighter gauge spring wire, slightly different design of the trigger return spring itself. And by the way, we're going to show you how to reinstall this. This is a booger. You want to have your short and your long tines. The short one, we're going to insert it right down in there. The long one is going to be left exposed, and we're going to get our center coils down in place like that for me to pin it with something like so. But we're going to need to use a slave pin. That pin actually was a high power extractor pin, and I just cut it down a little bit. You want the right length so that you can then come right back through with the pin and hold it in position as it's installed, and then it's going to be pushed the rest of the way back out. And if I have any luck here at all, we're going to get that in position. And what you want to do is you want to have that pin just a little shorter in length than the distance from the outer part of the hole to the outer part of the other hole. And there we go. Because you can't have any pins sticking out on either side when that is to be reinstalled. So now our trigger return spring is in place. Now we're going to be able to install that into our CZ. And I think the location for the front end of the trigger return spring there is probably rather obvious. We're going to want to get our trigger bar set where it's going to live first. Like that. Trigger in place like that. And we're going to notice that our two tines of that trigger bar spring, those are affirmatively under the bottom of the trigger bar right there. And we are going to be ready to pin our trigger in place. We're going to find us a 5/64 pin punch. Got it. we're going to need to come from, in this case, I want to come from the right side. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate that slave pin and press that slave pin out and replace it with a pin punch like we just did. And we're going to save that pin for later use someday. Now from here we're able to actually check some of the function of our trigger. In this position, everything looks like we're in good shape. Our magazine release is in good shape. Everything here seems good. I like the way that light trigger return spring feels. And now we're going to follow the pin punch on back out with the trigger pin. And I'm just holding pressure on the pin punch. We're going to need to get that pin a little bit more down in the hole before we start that. And we're far enough in there so far. Probably take a 3/32 nail punch here at this point, and that'll make a good finisher, I think. That trigger pin, slightly kinder and gentler world than the high power world is, for sure. And I think we're just about sunk in there. We're about even on each side. I'm a little too far out now. Okay, feels good. All right, going to install our slide stop spring next. This is the slide stop spring, and they come in 3 different shapes because CZ has used 3 different shapes of those. There's a small little hole, you can see it right there. Comes from this side on the inside, and that's where this main slide stop spring that matches the type used in this model, we're going to set it right there like that. Now, in order to keep that spring in place, we're going to need to press down on the spring here, and we have a magic pin that came out of there. It has a little groove in the middle. The spring is actually going to keep this pin in place. So we're just going to press down on the spring, install our pin like that, and it's done. All right, next we're going to install the hammer assembly. This is a fairly simple thing. We're just going to come straight down from the top like that, and we can hook everything kind of in place like that. Not really cinching anything yet. One exception, we are going to go ahead and put the pin in that holds the hammer. Goes in from left to right, and it just goes in just like so. Next little job, we got the hammer pin stop pin, and in order for that to go in, do have to have that hammer pin all the way in that way, and this is a good place for non-magnetizing pliers, and that pin actually does just kind of fall in place just like that. And there we go. One more piece installed. This is a little trick, but it's not nearly as hard as it seems. This is the safety detent out of the CZ, and it goes right in this channel right here. And all we're going to do, I'm going to attempt to do this in a way where it can be visible to the camera. Good luck with that, Marcus. Go ahead and place it in its position like that. My technique for this one has always been, it's a thumb motion and a feel thing. So now that I have it in place like that, all I'm going to do is come rearward with it, and that was it. It's now in place. Okay, now we're going to install the ejector sear firing pin lever carriage. And see how we're oriented here. We have our hammer assembly, trigger bar. Now we are going to go in right down on top, and the way that you want to orient this is we're now going to be looking to line up the hull, and we have done so, and you can see it right here. Even if you look down in there, you see a spring that is crossing that hole down in there. We're going to lift that spring up because we won't get through or installed if we don't. So from this position, we're going to take our safety lever. Safety lever has a little tip right here. It's going to rotate right inside there, but for right now, we should be able to, we're going to go about that far. Now we're going to bring our spring, lift it upward, and okay, now we have gotten back to basically this point right there. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get down in, and I want to show you right the place to do this. Okay, now we're going to finish getting that safety installed. I want to show you real quickly if I can. Right here, if that shows up, there's a place. I'm going to get a hold of that with the edge of a screwdriver, pull back, and press forward and in. I'm liking the way that safety is sounding. It was very indecisive, very mushy, no positive clickage, so to say, before, and we're definitely going to, I think, enjoy that a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to put our hammer assembly components back in. We have our mainspring. Remember, we're going with a 15-pound mainspring on this one. And we have our cap. Now, this is a tricky little deal right here. We're looking to put this little tab basically right there after we have pushed it up like this. So we're going to come just like this, up with that tab, into position just like that. Now the top of our metal piece is going to go in here. We have the pin, and it just pushes in, just that easy, like that. Now we're going to come with our bottom pin, just like this. Gentlemen, we're getting closer. Better. And we have no extra parts on the table. That's good news. Looks like it's time to put our slide stop in. And it's time to do a trigger brake test. And I think we're going to be also going out and doing a little test shooting. And we're going to be wrapping up the CZ-75 adventure here very, very soon. We're all reassembled, have a new spring set up on board. And you remember going back to that first session, or when this project of showing the disassembly, assembly, and some alternative spring setups for the CZ. I think we were out of the box at 10 or 10.5 pound double action side trigger pull, and we were around 4.5, say 4.5 pounds on the single action side, and we did put in a lighter spring setup, and it is specifically for lightening a trigger pull. Before we go into this, unless we're dealing with a competition shooter, we would not send back a firearm that is breaking where this one now is, and I'll show you. Just for defensive purposes, this is not a trigger that is set up for adrenaline or to be mixed with or stirred up with adrenaline. So having said that, we want to just make sure that we're doing the responsible things where trigger breaks are concerned. But we have done this now only with springs. We've not sawed on any metal or changed anything structurally in the handgun or any of the hard parts whatsoever. This has only been done with springs. And just to review real quickly, we did light firing pin spring because of a lighter mainspring. We did a light trigger return spring. We did a light firing pin plunger spring, lighter mainspring, and we increased the recoil spring, or the power of the weight of the recoil spring. So we are at the point where we are going to do some trigger break scale readings. And let's see, first we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the double action side. And we'll let you see for yourself on that. That was, remember, a 10-pound, that was a 10-pound trigger break. And 6 pounds, 3 ounces. 6 pounds, 4.9 ounces. Wow, that one there was all the way down to, that's just a tick under 5. That could have been marking the scale slippage. That one there was more objective, I think. That's right around the same kind of numbers we've been getting on the double action side. Now, I will tell you, on the double action side, I could live with that. I could live with that if this was a double action only pistol. I could live with it. Let's take a look at the single action side now. 2.5 pound trigger pull. Again, this is not a defensive handgun for me anymore. If I was practiced with it, 2 pounds 13 ounces. If I was practiced with it and I liked that trigger break for a competition, I would be ecstatic with this. Okay, so you saw where the trigger break was at on our first time around, new out of the box. We're now going to go out and test fire, make sure everything here is still running with the way we want it to in this pistol as well. From this point, if I wanted to restore some of the resistance on the trigger, the first place that I would probably go to is I would probably go to the trigger return spring, and then I would go to the firing pin plunger spring next. Reason I would do that is because I would not increase the weight of the mainspring probably until last, because that's the one that's really going to do my double action trigger pull. In other words, that's going to be the one that's going to really increase that and bring that one back up. Not being a double action, single action total fan of that setup, I like the lighter double action side trigger breaks. That's why this works for me. So if I was going to go back, try to get this trigger back up to a single action trigger break where I would be wanting that for a defensive handgun, I would be going everywhere except the mainspring, which is again going to really pump up the double action side of the trigger break if I do that. And I would go ahead and I would get it from elsewhere and then go to that mainspring in the grip frame last. Truthfully, the way that this one is, as it is right now, that firing pin plunger spring, that'll get me about a half a pound. If I restored that one, I would probably go to that one first. And I'm going to see if I can give you an idea as to why. I want you to kind of hear the reset. Even though That is a sub 3-pound trigger pull. Do you notice that we are still getting healthy authoritative reset back after the trigger pull? And folks, that is defying gravity in the semi-auto handgun world. Normally, when you bring the trigger brake down to where it's in the range that this one is, you know, obviously we like that for accuracy. The trigger brake tends to pull the sights less off of the target when we have less resistance going on the trigger, but we usually greatly sacrifice trigger reset. And hopefully you could tell even in the video here that we haven't sacrificed much in the way of reset with this lifetime warranted tactical trigger return spring from BHSpringSolutions for CZ-75 pistols. And the last thing we're going to do, we're going to go out, test fire, and see how this new setup performs. Okay, semi-shifting gears here on the CZ-75. Now that we've gotten to where we've gotten to, we've resprung, tested our subject pistol. I thought I'd take this opportunity real quick to show you a learning tool here at BHSpringSolutions that we had and used extensively when we were developing our CZ-75 Springs product. It really was, I guess, influential in helping to teach and show us exactly what was going on specifically inside the CZ-75 when action is happening. And not that we couldn't have learned everything without this, but it did flatten the learning curve a little. And if you've never seen one of these, they're a fantastic learning tool. I thought I'd just get that out today and show that for a second. Back to our subject, and our subject right now is going to be, what are all of these other springs for? We've pretty well covered the springs in the high performance pack as far as doing a spring change out, which we completed in this particular CZ-75. However, what are all of these other recoil springs about, and what are these mainsprings about? Your mainspring, I'm going to start with that. Mainspring is that spring that is giving that hammer its energy when it goes home to the firing pin. Now, the interesting thing is the reason that we have 6 mainsprings has actually nothing to do with how hard or not that hammer hits the firing pin. It is a matter of this. When the slide reciprocates rearward, and you see what's happening, we're cocking that hammer. If we have more spring resistance behind this hammer, which would be a stronger mainspring, it's going to, the hammer cocking action is going to absorb or help to handle more of the recoil energy of the slide. And so if I was looking today to slow down my slide cycle rate without, frankly, increasing my double action trigger pull, that's the other nuance of your mainsprings. One of the reasons why I went with the 15-pound mainspring when we did the spring change out in this pistol is I wanted a much better double action side trigger pull. For me, the 10.5 to 11-pound trigger pull scenario on the double action side of the CZ-75 kind of makes the double action non-usable for me. And for this exercise, for this demonstration, we did go to a 15. Now, if I was unconcerned about the double action side and I wanted to control the slide cycle rate a little bit more, one of the ways I could do that is I could increase that mainspring and go back to a 17.5 or back to the OEM 20-pound. So this becomes a useful thing, especially I think for competition guys and guys that are doing a lot of reloading of their own ammunition, and you really need to balance out the pistol based on the power factor of the ammunition being used. Exceedingly helpful, but helpful for non-competition shooters as well. So that's what the deal is about the mainsprings. We had what we consider excessive slide cycle rate out of the box of this particular CZ-75 based on we were sending empty brass. you know, into the double digits. That's 11 feet, 12 feet kind of range. And we just don't need to be cycling that fast to send empty brass that far in order to get it clear of the gun. And that's the one thing that we have to understand about, well, why does the slide reciprocate rearward? It's to get rid of that empty shell casing. We don't have to throw it clear across the yard in order to successfully make that happen. In our experiences here, if we can be extracting for my personal taste and judgment, the 6 to 7 foot range is kind of really optimal. 5 feet is fine. 4 feet is also not a bad thing either. When we get under 4 feet, we start to get worried about things like short cycling. That means that the slide doesn't make it all the way to the rear, especially if you get to kind of the weak load in the box, and it doesn't get all the way to the rear and you have a malfunction because you don't cycle completely. And if you're tossing empty brass, you know, much less than 4 feet, you're getting very, very close to a short cycle. So we want to avoid that. We also want to avoid scenarios where we have hyper slide cycle rate, which means we're sending empty brass just a completely unreasonable distance. There's no reason for our slide to be functioning that fast. And it also, when that is happening, you are increasing the recoil impulse of the nose of the firearm, so to say, or the rise, or the some people call muzzle flip. Controlling that is a desirable thing. So again, we go back to paying attention to how far are we extracting those empty shell casings. Now, we did decrease when we went from the OEM recoil spring up to a 17-pound BHSpringSolutions spring. We did shorten the recoil or the extraction distance to what we would call an acceptable range. However, it was still a little bit farther than what would be my personal preference. So we're going to kind of show you today how that happens when we're judging this slide cycle rate. We're going to do a little bit more shooting. We're going to go ahead and expend a couple rounds today with the recoil spring in the firearm now, which is BHSpringSolutions 17-pound traditional recoil spring. We are then going to install an 18-pound progressive recoil spring. Then we're going to install an 18.5-pound conventional recoil spring. We're going to observe the extraction distance difference. Now, the thing you have to remember is as we are shortening that distance, we are also increasing the controllability of the firearm. We may also find accuracy increases. And the last thing that we do want to mention is when we are talking about these weights of recoil springs, what we are showing you here applies to BHSpringSolutions springs only. And we're going to explain to you why. When we say 17-pound recoil spring, 18-pound progressive, 18.5-pound recoil spring, 14-pound, when we say that, what we are saying is when that recoil spring that is now installed and is about that length in the gun right now, when the slide is all the way rearward, that recoil spring is now a different length. It is very compressed. From that compressed state, what we are saying is the recoil spring in the firearm right now will push 17 pounds of weight from its compressed dimensional length as it is right now with this slide fully rearward. Or in this case, if the slide was fully rearward, which it's almost when we're locked like this. That does not really tell us anything about the resistance of that spring when the spring is in this state. We like to think that a spring that will push harder when it's compressed will also have more resistance when the slide is in the forward position. This is very dependent on the relaxed dimensional length of the spring, the number of coils, the distance between the coils, and the amount of resistance or push that there is when the spring is in the state that it is in right now, and which is not the state that it is in when it pushes 17 pounds of weight forward. Now we don't have anything like 17 pounds of resistance with the slide in the forward position. This spring needs some assistance. It needs the help of that mainspring, that hammer spring. It also gets help from the trigger return spring, because watch what happens when the slide reciprocates rearward. The hammer is cocked, and as part of the action of the hammer being cocked, we are also pulling that trigger rearward, which is pulling against the resistance of the trigger return spring. That makes the trigger return spring part of your recoil equation in the CZ-75. For you high power aficionados, 1911 aficionados, your tension, resistance, and reset on your trigger has nothing to do with the recoil. In many double action, single action handguns, today the CZ-75, that trigger return spring does contribute to control of the recoil, because that trigger is getting cocked against the resistance of the trigger return spring as that hammer is being cocked by the slide. So this is the reason why we upped the recoil spring. Number one, we wanted to decrease the distance, but we also decreased resistance here. We decreased resistance here. We had to increase resistance on the slide, and that being with stronger recoil springs. Now, the reason why we're saying everything that we're saying to you here now applies to BHSpringSolutions recoil springs only, and that is because other springs do not take into account how strong does this spring need to be necessarily when the slide is in the slide forward position. When we test as we do, and we construct springs as we do, and the lengths that we do, part of the consideration is what's our resistance factor going to be when we are in the slide forward position. So I can tell you our resistance factor should increase with an 18.5 pound progressives or 18 pound progressive spring, which is the spring that we have here, as well as the 18.5 pound conventional recoil spring. And we should be watching our extraction distances shortening as we install these other springs. So that is what we will be going to next. And we've returned to the range with this BHOptimized CZ-75, and I actually got 4 shooters out here because we're just going to have some fun with this, and got quite a bit of ammunition loaded up, partly because we want to fully test out this spring setup and observe. We also, as part of this spring setup changeout, we wanted to address some of that hyper extraction distance of the empty shell casing. So we're going to be watching that too. Dave and I are going to take top part of those targets. Logan and Plemena will take the bottom part of the targets, the center mass part. And here we go. I think this is really, really running super. Dave, you want to go next? Hey, before you do, I'll tell you what, you take the other top one over there. We'll go out and check out the we are extracting 8 to 9 feet, so we're not into the 10 foot, not into the 10 and 11 foot stuff anymore. We could go to a 18 progressive, possibly even to an 18.5 pound recoil spring, but the 8 and 9 foot extraction distance, that's much better controlled than we were seeing before. Let's go see how we're doing as far as accuracy. Mark was here, and Dave was there. We're going to get Logan and Plemena. Empty. And Plementa. Okay, we're out on the range and we have installed an 18-pound progressive recoil spring in this CZ-75, and I think we got 5 rounds loaded up. We're specifically looking at that extraction distance, and when we had the 17-pound spring in, we were into the 7, 8, 9 foot kind of a range. Now we're going to take a look and see what happens with the 18-pound progressive. Let her go. Okay, we had a few. We're shooting at Winchester 115 grain. What I saw was the 5, 6, 7 foot range. We had one there that looked like it had a lot of powder, and but the bulk of the rounds were there. So we've definitely slowed the slide cycle rate down. We're going to take a look and see what an 18.5-pound traditional recoil spring looks like next. Okay, back out now. We have a conventional 18.5-pound recoil spring. We're going to see how this extracts real quick. Had a couple powerful loads there to start that with, into about the 6, 7 foot range. For my purposes, if I was going to be selecting a recoil spring here right about now, I think I would probably go back that 18-pound progressive, a little easier to rack, and seem to have nice consistency. The 18.5 is fine too. You have to understand, there's so little difference between these springs when you start talking a 17-pound progressive, 17 conventional, 18-pound progressive, 18.5-pound conventional. There's so little difference, and it is, I guess, say somewhat kind of subtle. But what you just saw here is the effectiveness, I think, of BHSpringSolutions Optimized Springs for CZ-75. How effective they are at bringing that recoil down, or in some cases, if you want to have more slide velocity, you lighten the spring, and that's essentially the way that it is done. We after we tested in the initial testing of with the 17-pound spring, seemed like we were still just a little bit on the hot side, so just a little bit more spring in the recoil position, and that takes care of that. I'm gonna mention one more thing while we're finishing up here, and that is this particular handgun came out with a just shy of 3-pound single action trigger pull, and I want to come back to that subject real quickly and just talk about that, because first of all, that would not meet my requirements for a defensive handgun or any handgun being used in a defensive role. So if I was wanting to now go back and add resistance back into the trigger pull, this brings up a concept. I'm going to introduce it here real quickly. What I would want to be doing first is I would want to try to add what I call productive resistance. An example of productive resistance would be putting back the traditional trigger return spring instead of the optimized version. The productivity of that change would be, I would be adding resistance back to the trigger pull, number one, which is what I want to do. I would also be adding a little bit more authority on the reset, which can also be a good thing. So again, I'm adding back productive resistance first in the area where I'm wanting that increased resistance back. Another way to add productive resistance, in this case, it's not as productive, but you have a firing pin plunger spring that is also optimized. It could go back to the standard. You may increase resistance with that one by maybe 1/8 of a pound, but cumulatively along with your trigger, maybe that puts that trigger back into a more comfortable place for a defensive, or so that it becomes more of an adrenaline trigger. To me, a sub 3 pound trigger pull is not an adrenaline trigger, shouldn't be used as one. So anyway, that's going to finish us up for the CZ-75 series on the BHSpringSolutions Optimized Gun Springs for CZ-75. And we invite all of your questions, you CZ-75 fans, and we are one. So again, I'm Mark Allen for BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, and on behalf of the entire team at BHSpringSolutions, we thank you.